UBC, inspiring Uganda. UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Tonight we focus on the United Nations Secretary General race that is going to happen in the very near future. Right now we're looking at who will be the next Secretary General of the United Nations, as Antonio Guterres will be coming to an end come December this year. Uganda seems to have backed its own horse in Dr. Ambassador Olaro Otuno. What does that mean for us as a country? We have had a president of the United Nations Assembly. We've also had a permanent representative at the United Nations there. And we're wondering, if this change happens, with the 6 plus our own candidate happens there, what does that mean for us as a country? What does he bring to the table, especially for Uganda? But also you as an ordinary Ugandan, how does this trickle down to you? The fuel, when you look at the fuel and you look at the conflicts that are happening within the globe, how does that affect you and us? Can he make resolutions that will count in the tenure that he might get going forward? That's the conversation today, but let's get to the panel that will be making sense of this conversation this evening. On my immediate left, Professor Sarah Sari, the first Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Makerere University. She's with us this evening. Good evening, Professor, and it's good to have you. Good evening, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. I'm happy to be here. Next to Professor is Honorable Mukasa Fred Mbide, the Deputy President of the Democratic Party. He's with us this evening. Good evening, sir, and it's good to have you.
Yes, thank you, Timothy. Good evening. Of course, the panelists, that includes my teachers and the viewers. I think we are going to have a very serious classroom debate.
Someone sent me a message as you were coming, said, should we prepare with dictionaries as is here?
No. No, I am going to be as guided as practicable.
Okay.
I don't want to be undermarked.
No problem, since the teachers are here. Next, making his maiden appearance on our show, Professor Apuli Kasaija, who is with the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at Makerere University. He's with us this evening. Good evening, Professor. How are you?
Fine. Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, panelists, and good evening, viewers.
Lastly but not least, Professor Waswa Balunywa, an economist, but also a member of the Central Executive Committee in the NRM, is with us this evening. Good evening, Professor, and it's good to have you.
Good evening, Timothy. Thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Finally, Alan Kasuja, the Executive Director of the Uganda Media Center. He's with us this evening. Good evening, Alan. It's good to have you back.
Good evening.
So we'll be looking especially that some of the 6 candidates had a town hall debate last week. Our very own was not there, but he received the message from our president when his nomination went through. Ambassador Dr. Olaro Otuno will be our candidate for our country, but also Senegal has sent through their own candidates, and the United Nations was established after the Second World War. Let's get into the merits and demerits of that, but before we jump into that, you can join us on YouTube, drop your comment there, let us know what you think. Also on X, we're streaming live on the spaces there, drop your comment, let us know what you think. The number for text or WhatsApp, 0709 60 25 92. Before we jump into any conversation, gentlemen and lady, quick comments on especially what happened yesterday. Local council elections, the foundation of administration in this country, went through. Professor, did you vote, and how did it go?
Yeah, thank you very much, Timothy. Of course, it went well. It was largely peaceful. Yeah, I'm not sure what the fallout of those. We had so many stories of couples who went to the polling station with several wives, contestants, and they still lost. There had been a lot of hype in communities that the younger people would take over.
Yes.
But we saw very many old guards who have been around as LOC chairman for more than 20 years coming back. I think that means something. I think the youth wave is more at a higher level, but when it comes to the real nitty-gritty on the grassroots, it looks like people still have trust in the older people than the younger people. So that is one, but also the other thing is, I think one of the other things we felt is we need to rethink at that level the requirement for people to resign so as to run. Because if you look at Makerere, most of the people who reside in Makerere are also staff members. It's because of their employment that they're in Makerere University, that's the campus. So if you say that for one to run as an LC chairperson, they have to first resign, people are not going to resign their jobs in the university to run. So we ended up with a number of LC chairmen who don't actually have a presence on the campus. They are neither students nor staff. Either someone is a newspaper vendor, or someone knew that there was a vacancy there. They came and got nominated there, and many positions were won unopposed. It's not like in the olden days whereby an LC1 chairman within the university would be a professor, would be a senior student or something like that. So I think that's the only thing I saw. Otherwise, it was good to see people exercise their democracy like that. But I think in future, for people to rule others or to lead others at community level, it should really be based on people's trust, not necessarily that they need to resign their jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Mbide, your take on the local council, LC1, LC2, women representatives were done there, but they still paid peanuts. Is it still relevant to have these lower administrative units?
Yes, actually, it is the local council administration that usually gets Uganda among us the best four on the African continent. Of course, South Africa, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. So this kind of local arrangement that is majorly orthodox and village-related is extremely important. The local council administration is actually more important, almost, than all the other peremptory other positions to which, of course, members have voted for. I can tell you succinctly that without these local council leaderships, I think we cannot be in position to curb the degree of criminality in the country. They are the cheapest means of administration that we have in Uganda. Not paid for, certainly, but you can know that these are almost majorly voluntary. That is why these are positions for which I myself, as a personal opinion, do not even think that it should be, that election should be based on partisan political party affiliations. In my opinion, I think it is supposed to be integrity-based. And these are people that can be in position to, of course, galvanize the stability and robustness of community arrangements.
Thank you. Professor Puli, I've not been around a long time, but just looking at what happened this past week, processions, numerous candidates there. When you look at the RC and now the LC administrative units in 1986 and now, are there any similarities? Is there anything we're learning from this?
Well, Timothy, I normally tell my students that I don't comment on local politics. There are more qualified people here who can comment on local politics. I normally deal with regional and international politics, but in terms of where I live and the participation, one very good example is the guy who normally washes my car in Bukoto. He stood and won. He's now very excited. In fact, I'm going to buy him a desk and a chair so that he can start operating as a chairman of the village. So I would like to congratulate Musomesa for having gone through. But you can't build democracy without the local structures. I think as a political scientist, this is where really things happen, because minus the local structures, then you cannot build a resilient and self-sustaining democracy. So the exercise that happened yesterday, of course, in 1986, the LCs or the RCs at that time, which were more based on individual merit, not on political party platforms, this would be the difference. I remember in the election that I participated in at that time, we voted for a thief to become a defense secretary. and he did, and after that, the thieving stopped. So people get responsibilities in a way. It also, gets the local communities to possibly also resolve their problem. Of course, everybody now is excited about the stamps. Everywhere you go now, everybody's talking about the stamp. Stamp has become a stamp. And I have a personal experience. I went to get a letter from the chairman for a specific reason, and unfortunately, I went driving. So I parked across the road, and when the man looked at me, I said, "Look, but this letter should be 10K." He said, "No, Mtamani. We moved away from that long time ago." I ended up parting with 200,000. So this stamp, the stamp by here now, it's been centralized. The local government is going to issue it, but beyond the stamp, of course, beyond the I'm not trying to trivialize the importance of the LOCs. So these are very important structures in our democracy.
Thank you. Professor Balunywa, it seems like with each passing electoral season, the temperature tends to go up regardless of the position that is there. I saw processions that I've never seen with LC1s. What has really prompted that now such a foundational local administrative unit has got so many people charged up there to ensure that they get into those positions?
Well, I think it's the interest in democracy in the country. As colleagues have said, really the grassroots is extremely important in promoting democracy. And I was amazed at the interest that people had. But it also brought out something very interesting with the young people who were unemployed. So we had a bit of violence in some places because they felt, as Fully has said, the stamp could have been one of the driving forces in people getting to this post. But it's also very important to recognize the fact that for the local communities, I think integrity probably was most important, rather than simply what party you have. But my colleague there is in the different party from mine, so we want to win the elections from our party, because we feel that it is the ideology that we're pursuing that is bringing people up. Yeah.
Thank you. Alan, finally, there was a poster that was going around of Solomon Sseruwanja, who I think you know is a journalist now with African Journalism, and he ran for LC1 and won. And I was listening to some of the things he was saying, that we need the elite to go back down there to ensure things are working. Do you believe in the same notion to have the elite go down there?
153%. I completely associate myself with that thinking. And personally, as a movementist, I accept that multi-party politics is what we have at the moment in Uganda, that's the current dispensation. Do I believe in it? Probably not, because I don't know that Uganda is actually structured to accommodate that sort of political thinking. I am more interested in individual merit politics and movement politics that allowed someone like my mother, who was a lifelong nurse, to become an LC1 chairperson. The most apolitical person I've ever met in my life became an LC1 chairperson because of the belief by the residents of Mengo Hospital at the time that she was the best person to handle their affairs. And when you have people like Solomon Sseruwanja, who is switched on, exposed, has some sense of right and wrong, and it's good. And I've always said we want doctors and engineers at that grassroots level. And I totally associate myself with the statement by Professor that Makerere University should be run by professors. The issues there should be run by people who are affected by them on a daily basis. We shouldn't have survivors and hustlers and careerists at an LC1 level, because I think that sort of distorts political thinking, it distorts political direction, and it moves it away from ideology to parasitism, to a parasitic relationship.
Thank you. Let's jump into our conversation. The candidates were nominated, and between July and August, they'll be presented before the UN Security Council. Later on in the year, they'll be presented before the UN Assembly for one to be picked or appointed to become Secretary General of the UN. That will happen then in Jan of 2027 there. But let me come to Alan first and foremost, because this announcement was made and Ambassador Dr. Olara Otunu really accepted it at the media center. Your take on the gentleman that is the candidate for the country and the thinking behind it by the president?
You know, you have to give it to President Museveni. This is really the highest level of political chess you can ever come across. You know, by appointing Olara Otunu, it's a huge statement. This was a sworn enemy of the president, politically at least, and they differed significantly, but the president has agreed for him to run as Uganda's candidate at the United Nations. We can debate whether he stands a chance or not, but at a local level, it's incredible that that has happened. And knowing their history, knowing the differences they've had over time, I applaud the president for showing that magnanimity and appointing Olara Otunu, who's been probably one of his most fierce critics over the years. And also for Olara Otunu personally, I think it's some sort of self-actualization. You know, the man is 75 years old now. He probably stood a better chance 30 years ago, but I wouldn't rule him out completely now because his impact on the United Nations is still being felt, and he probably will clock some mileage. Let's wait and see how it goes, and we wish him the very best in this pursuit.
Alan, sticking with you, because the Ambassador Olara Otunu did want to vie in '96. Government didn't endorse him. What has changed?
I think conversations have happened between him and President Museveni. As simple as that. I think, you know, there's a certain caliber of Ugandans. This General Museveni, these Amama Mbawazis, these people who could disagree, but also respect each other in those disagreements. Take different positions, but somehow maintain some level of respect. And I think there was some mutual respect all through, because it's very difficult to dismiss Olara Otunu's, you know, profile. He's done significant things as a foreign minister. I think what has changed more than anything else is that a conversation has happened. And that conversation is what has led to the sort of rapprochement, I don't know what the right phraseology is, between the two. And for me, this is the icing on the cake. This is the, and from President Museveni's perspective, it just makes me even much more interested in the person and the thinking of the president, because he has moved a chess piece, and it's a very interesting move that he has made. And it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Does he expect Olara Otunu to win? I don't know. Does it matter if Olara Otunu wins or not? Probably not. But Uganda will be in the contest.
Thank you. Professor Balunywa, Ambassador Otunu comes with a wealth of experience on the diplomatic scene, but also having been Minister of Foreign Affairs, having been Undersecretary to the UN when Kofi Annan was there. But also the candidates, the other 6 candidates, in the most recent past, have been in the governments of their countries. Mentioned like the candidate from Senegal has been in cabinet, there has been a diplomat.
Has been president.
Has been president.
Macky Sall.
Yes. And you see this, how does that play in for the space that he hasn't been in any political scene or any diplomatic scene? What makes him formidable?
I think if you go by the African Union principles, ordinarily you would expect that the African Union should back a candidate. And I'm surprised to learn that Senegal has put up somebody.
Yes.
So it would have been good for Dr. Olara Otunu if he was the only candidate from Africa. So you would have this block vote, hopefully, that would come into play. But this is something we want to discuss, whether actually that block vote can actually come.
Yes.
But I mean, given his experience, definitely he's the most ideal candidate. And even looking at the continent, he's somebody who's been in diplomacy for that long, Minister of Foreign Affairs for that long, and definitely the most ideal candidate. And what Anne is saying, something about President Museveni's reconciliatory spirit is what beats us all, because we didn't expect that. But if you go back into history, for him to run government effectively, he's gone and talked to people he's been shooting guns with. You know, and Moses Ali was one example, the late Moses Ali, and many others. So I think the candidacy is unique because, first of all, it was not expected. Two, given that history they had behind them, and the need for the country to also be at peace with itself, I think is the right candidate.
Professor Apuli, the 6 candidates had the town hall last week. A very rigorous debate, talked about crisis, talked about what's happening around the world. Our very own Ambassador Olara wasn't there. What does this mean for his chances, especially now that we all know that there are 7 candidates that are running for the Secretary General?
There's so much to say about this candidature, but I think for me the point would be the town hall would have added something to the candidature of Olara Otun, because then the other candidates have been exposed to the General Assembly, which is supposed to do the appointment. Of course, the rules say that the Secretary General is appointed by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council. Now, crucially, of course, having missed out on the town hall, but he still has a chance because you have to canvass the UN Security Council. And I think that's where the really most important decision is going to be made. And not the entire of the Security Council, but rather the P5, the permanent 5. Because once the P5 have agreed, it's certain 100% that you're going to be appointed. So yes, he missed out on the town hall, but he still has a chance between now and November, when the final vote is taken. Tomorrow we are going to go into the straw polling, where the council members are going to be asked to vote informally, but to indicate their preference. Now the process, how it unravels, is that the council will be given, members will be given papers. The 10 non-permanent members will be given white papers. They vote on white. The permanent members are given two sets, if I remember off my head. One is the green, and the other used to be blue, now it's red. So where they indicate to encourage, if you want to encourage the candidate to go forward, you vote on the green. If you want to discourage the candidate, you vote on red. And then that will give us an indication. So by the end of Friday, we'll get an indication out of the 7 how many people have been discouraged, how many candidates have been discouraged from going forward. So yes, so the most crucial thing for me would be that he does not get any veto, or does not get any veto from the P5. But even if you got a veto from any of the P5, because history has shown that the previous Secretaries General, Dag Hammarskjöld, U Thant, Kurt Waldheim, Kofi Annan, Boutros Ghali, all of them got at least one at some point in the process. They got a discouraging vote, but that did not stop them becoming a Secretary General. But the most important thing is not really to get any of the negative votes. And I think with the CV which Dr. Olara Otun has presented, the vision which he has presented, those 10 points in terms of the reforms, the Pact of the Future, UN at 80, all this, I think would make him a very strong candidate. Although, of course, also we must put a caveat that the multilateral system in general is in trouble. Is in trouble. Why? Because of the geopolitics that is happening, the crisis that we have seen in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and the whole thinking among the permanent members of the Council that the UN should do less. That's why some of the members have left some of the most important structures. So yes, Dr. Olara Otun has his work cut out for him.
Professor, before I leave you to come to Honorable Mbide, you mentioned something about how interesting this candidature is. What do you mean by that?
The interesting thing is, and again, we also need to look at this from the point of view of the domestic politics. And I would want to associate myself with what Alan and the Prof has said, that part of the longevity of the NRM government is to be able to reach out at very crucial times to extend a hand to the former opponents. That in 2026, we can have a government of Uganda supporting or putting forward a candidate who, when he was the Undersecretary General for Children in Armed Conflict, he was the first occupant of that office. And the things he said and wrote about what was happening in northern Uganda. And now, so many years down the road, 30 years or so, the same government can nominate him for this very prestigious position, which of course also we need to remember that when we talk about the Macky Sall's candidature, Macky Sall was not nominated by Senegal, he was nominated by Burundi. Why? Because he had fallen out with the government of the current government in Senegal. Macky Sall is Senegalese, currently is living in Morocco, nominated by Burundi. Of course, now the realignment of domestic politics in Senegal the current government has agreed to support him. But there is that bit also, and I think also we need to go into this because the candidature of Macky Sall is not supported by the AU. In fact, when he was first nominated by Burundi, 24 African countries objected, including his own Senegal. They said, look, this is not our candidate because he has not gone through the processes of the African Union, which is the Credentials Committee to agree a common position and all that, which of course Dr. Olaro Otunnu also suffers from because he is really not a candidate for the African Union. But that notwithstanding, what I think is interesting is the point that the President Museveni and his government, the way they are able, our very own person who is here, Mukasa Mbide, went to the East African Legislative Assembly. Because of that extending of the hand by the NRM, where Mbide was described as a good DP, and he became a member of Yala. And he has served 10 years in Yala, courtesy of the support that he got from. So, and I think that's the mature politics which Alan is talking about, that we should be able to go beyond. This is what we have been lacking in this country, that we need to go beyond some of this, the punch and Judy kind of politics that we, as the British call it. And we really stand on principle and we say this is our candidate and we can support this person. So, thank you. So give it to the NRM.
Honorable Mbide, already punches have been thrown your way.
Yes.
In good faith. When you look at, especially for the domestic politics that Professor Apuli was talking about, what does this mean? Because between 2010 and 2015, this was the height of the Uganda People's Congress. At the helm of it was Dr. Olaro Otunnu. What does this mean for politics in Uganda at large?
There is something very interesting when you get to both sub-regional and global political contexts. There is usually no latitude provided for opposition sentiments, except if you are in rebellion, because you cannot oppose a country. You cannot oppose a government. And you cannot find, I have been, for example, to the East African Legislative Assembly for 10 years. I have not found any opportunity whatsoever for me to oppose anything related to political parties in Uganda, whether NRM or any other. So generally, there is no point that arises except points that have everything to do with whether or not you support your country or not. Where, for example, of course, by all necessary conformity, you'll be supporting your country. So both sub-regional and global opportunities provide no alternative for dissenting ideas relating to which government leads your country. And I think that is why, for me, President Museveni also thinks that Olaro Otunnu can be in position to be Secretary General, backed by Uganda. However, of course, I also find that the opposition colleagues need to understand it is extremely important that a person with opposition sentiments becoming Secretary General of the UN, it is an easier route for us to pursue our perspectives through him. It is easier, even by WhatsApp, than what is happening, for example. So for me, I would support him entirely. Now, the president of Uganda needs to be given a lot of credit for what Alan has also called the magnanimity. We will also add meekness and ignobility. This is a kind that you will never find. The manner in which he looks at perspectives is mind-boggling. You will never know how he plays his chess. Whether or not Dr. Otunu wins, I am telling you, the president of Uganda has already won. He has played his chess. Dr. Otunu will no longer accuse him of not having backed him in the 90s when he chose to definitely run for the same position. It is also surprising that he actually ran. He was nominated, I think, by Senegal? Cote d'Ivoire. Ivorian, yes. So I can tell you that what Macky Sall was about to suffer from, of course, notwithstanding the fact that obviously now the country is tending towards, gravitating towards now supporting the cause. There is something that we need to look at. When Dr. Otunu proposes radical and robust amendments to the UN, of course, operation structure, the question is, why is the structure the way it is? Who is aggrieved? Now, if the answer is that it is preferred to be as permanent as it is, then obviously that doesn't qualify us for the vote. I can tell you that Africa, per se, is a complainant in terms of the current organization structure of the UN system. So clearly, if regard is to be made, for me, my fear would be of Rodriguez, who is the candidate from Guyana. Because now Guyana, because it is a member, of course, of the non-permanent members of the 10. So if you have got somebody who is there among us, the 10, of course, in addition to the P5, but somebody who can be in position to shape debates, to be able to align some bit of, you may find that such a candidate will have leverage over Dr. Otunu. It is going to be surprising that Dr. Otunu may make it. For example, what are the questions that create the objective reasons that will make it a logical necessity for him to be elected? For example, what would be the interest that is available by the P5 in terms of who should become Secretary General? What are the roles required? A Secretary General of the UN, in terms of the lenses of the P5, is akin to a vice president of an African country. Who would you prefer? Is it an active vice president almost akin to taking over your seat, or somebody who may not be in position to even see at night? So African leaders would prefer the person that cannot be even in position to catch a tortoise. That should be your vice president. Because their worry day and night is whether you can target their own seats. So the P5 might prefer somebody from Uganda, might prefer Dr. Otunu, and I can tell you a perspective of that nature may carry the day, and we would get breaking news in Uganda.
And we'll come back to that about the P5 and their interests here. Professor, while Dr. Otunu was accepting the nomination from the president, you also mentioned, minus the 10 points, you also mentioned something he did that now is called the consensus, the Otunu something there in the UN. Does this give him a foot into the race, like a lead into the race before his other 6 candidates there? And what does he have to bring more on the table since he already missed a town hall?
Well, I think matters of the UN are as unpredictable as members have presented them, but he has been there before. He has led peace initiatives around children in war. I hope that can give him an advantage, but he also enters the race against other formidable candidates. Okay, for him, he has served in the UN and in different portfolios, but the other people have been presidents. And of course, here we are talking about, oh, you see, he's not the Africa candidate. But I looked where for us we are complaining about not having an Africa candidate. The other 5 candidates are all from Latin America or something like that. Guyana, Ecuador, Chile. Pardon?
It's the turn for Latin America.
It's the turn for Latin America. So you don't even have a single candidate for Latin America. There are quite a number of them nominated by one or the other. So, and of course, the interesting thing is there are very many women. There are at least 4 women, which is very impressive. Many of them also have been ex-heads of state. So I think the whole lineup are very formidable candidates. And it is good that our role is part of that, because like, it's not an exclusive club, but very distinguished persons at that level. So for me, I'm excited that at the time we are talking about that level of creme de la creme, Uganda has a candidate there, nominated by our head of state. And like someone has said, whether he wins or not, Uganda has already won. The president has already won. So for us, we are happy that he's there. So does he stand a chance? I really don't know. I think Philip is very good at discussing these things. For the different number of days and nights, he has been discussing them on the WhatsApp groups of the Professors Forum in Makerere, how the voting will take place and whatever. So I think each of them stands a chance. And if it is a turn for Latin America, then maybe it's not necessarily a turn for Africa. But we are happy that we got to participate. And we hope that actually he can win. If he wins, we shall be very happy. If he doesn't win, we shall still be very happy that His Excellency nominated him, and we got a candidate in, even if we don't win.
Thank you. And that brings me back to Professor Apuli. Professor, and now let's get to the UN itself. 81 years here, it has been here. A lot of things have changed from the 3 mandates that it got, from peace and security to human rights to going on to sustainable development there. At 81 years of the UN, is it still relevant as an organization?
Look, if the UN didn't exist, we'll have all the reasons to create one. You see, let's just step back and look at 1945, at the end of the Second World War. We wanted to create a new world order. This new world order, which of course was different from the time of the League of Nations, which proved to be very ineffective in terms of doing what was really crucial, which is preventing war. For the last 81 years, we can certainly say, with a lot of uncertainty and without any fear of contradiction, that the UN has succeeded in preventing a third world war. What does this mean? What does this mean? You look at the opening words on the United Nations Charter. It says, we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save the succeeding generation from the scourge of conflict. This is what the UN was built to do. Now, many people, of course, you know, they look at the United Nations, the failures, Rwanda, Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, and make conclusions, oh, this organization is rubbish. Absolutely not. For me, I look at it from the point of view of what the founding document of the Charter, sorry, in the Charter, what it says. That is a living document. By the way, the Charter is one of the most difficult documents to amend. That's how difficult it is. So at this organization, we've had it, I don't know how many times we have changed our constitution, which is about 30 years. The UN Charter has been changed only 3 times since 1945. Well, I'm not saying that it cannot, I'm not saying that it cannot be changed, but it's very hard to be changed.
That makes it a problem.
Even in the context, by the way, even in the context of constitutions, there are flexible constitutions, there are rigid constitutions. The American Constitution has been changed about 25 times since 1776. That's how difficult it is, because you have to make, the covenant that you make, the 10 Commandments, even those of you who, the Imbides who go to church every Sunday, they will tell you that the 10 Commandments, the way they were handed down to that's how they still are. So my point simply here is this, that this organization, we may condemn it because of the failure that we see, but it does more than, and especially in the context of issues of peace and security. Even if we was to concentrate only on peace and security, I had the chance, and this is the beauty with the, Professor Sali and I attended the same course. We did the same course. And we were taught by the same professor, Professor Pincho. And we used to have a paper called 3.3, United Nations. So, United Nations. So, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I can tell you this. So even if we concentrated only on peace and security, what the UN has been able to do from 1945 to date, so many peace support operations, peacekeeping operations, issues to do with the human rights, studying human rights, all this. Of course, this is it's academic, of course, for everyday person. I think this is where Alan is heading. For the everyday person, if you say the United Nations has succeeded somewhere, they tell me, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Rwanda, yeah, this is, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I don't
understand.
But also, we also need to understand this. And again, as I tell my students, that the UN was designed to deal with interstate problems. The whole thing, this whole structure is designed for interstate problems, not intrastate problems.
So what is it doing? What is MONUSCO doing?
Now, exactly, okay, I'll come to that. Now, because of the fact that we do not have an alternative, that's why we have MONUSCO in Congo. That's why we have MINUSMA in Mali. That's why we have MINUSCA in Central African Republic, because we do not have an alternative. You tell me, even the Congo, which Alan you are talking about, Congo's problem started when? They started as Congo when it was founded as a Congo Free State. Congo is the only country in the world which I know was founded as a personal estate of a king, somewhere in Belgium. Personal estate. This person decided to exploit Congo. When he left, it is the Belgian state which took over. By the time, if you look at the statistics, when by the time Congo got independent in 1960, there are only 5 doctors, 2 engineers, and it had been colonized for over 70 years. Now we can condemn every African country. Now Congo in 1960 implodes. That's why we have Katanga, we have all this. So again, we can go into the history of this. So what do? The first mission which the United Nations does, Alan, is 1960, ONUC. ONUC is patchwork because fundamentally the state, you know, the late John Garang used to say, when he would talk about Sudan, they will ask him, say, this, we need to have a new agenda for Sudan. And he would say, it is so deformed to be reformed. Now, Congo, we need to understand it. This is something which was deformed from the word go as a state. So how do you reform this kind of thing? So it's been patchwork since 1960. Patchwork, why? Because of the way it was founded. Now, calling in MONUSCO, calling in the United Nations is also an acknowledgement that we do have a fundamental problem with this thing. But can we say the United Nations has succeeded in Congo? Certainly not. Just like you could also say the UN has not succeeded. I agree, whether it is Central African Republic, whether it is Mali, whether it is Kosovo, whether it is Sudan, whether it is South Sudan, we can talk about all these missions. But the fact of the matter simply, Alan, is this, and my point simply is that this is what we have. The multilateral system is expressed through the United Nations.
Okay,
Professor,
yes.
With due respect, I think, first of all, the United Nations is not sacrosanct, and it must be interrogated. And we must have an honest conversation about its abilities. It was created in 1945, at a time when the world was recovering from a war. This is 2026. And the United Nations still can't decide whether or not to allow 1.5 billion Africans to have a say on the Security Council. We look at the United Nations and its current...
Sorry, Alan.
I know.
The United Nations is not a human being.
No,
at the end of the day.
Professor, allow me, please. Allow me to land this point that I'm about to lose. I think, in my view, first of all, I've associated myself with the United Nations. I don't have the bona fides of claiming that I studied the same 3.3, but I have worked at the United Nations. I have been part of a journalist corps at the United Nations. I have studied it in law. And in my view, as the president said once, when you go to the United Nations in New York, as I have been many times, you think that it's a collection of Africans because you have all these African countries represented by individuals. But and whereas you can argue that sovereignty is important, we must come back home and rethink whether we are really wanted in these spaces. 2006, we are promised that we are going to have a seat at the United Nations. Everybody who comes up says we are going to reform it. But the dysfunction does not allow the reform that is required for Africa to have a voice. So my point is, how about we default to our regional blocks and strengthen those and have a functional East African community and have a very coherent and effective African Union that can then push for Africa's position more in a much more united, because we do need the United Nations and to associate with the world because of human development and all these other benefits. But we have to default to who we truly are as Africans and say that we as Africans need a strong African Union, and also we need a strong East African community, because that is where we truly have impact, influence, and can determine our own issues. But if you're going to continue begging,
just a minute.
If you're going to continue begging for a seat at someone else's table, which was set up without our involvement, that is problematic.
I think, Alan, you have I'm absolutely associating myself with your sentiments. Number one, let's not assume that the UN is a human being. At the end of the day, the UN is an intergovernmental organization.
Made up of human beings.
It is member states. The way the UN operates, the way the strength of the United Nations is what the member states allow it to be. So in other words, it's the member states at the end of the day who we default to. Now, the second point that we are trying to make, on the point of interrogating what the UN is or is not. First of all, you go to back to the basics. Is there something called the UN? In fact, if we were the one, if we go to back to the basics and we will ask, is there a UN really? Because this is an organization which was set up by basically two people. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. In fact, the name United Nations was, as the two men sat in 1944, as they sat in the White House, debating on what this new organization should be called to succeed the League of Nations. It is Eleanor Roosevelt who burst out of the kitchen and said, gentlemen, if you are looking for a name, why don't you call it United Nations? In fact, I normally tell my students that if it was patenting that thing named Eleanor Roosevelt should be receiving the money of the name of the United Nations. Now, just lastly, Timothy, I think the point which Alan is raising, which is very important, and again he takes us back to the debate of the early 1960s or late 1950s, where there was this debate whether Africa should have unity, or it should be we strengthen the regions, and this debate of the Casablanca group, Monrovia group. This is exactly what Alan is alluding to. Do we strengthen our regional economic communities? The answer is yes. East African communities, SADC, ECOWAS. But the point simply is that we need also, it is complementary. It's a building block. These regional economic communities.
Africa speaks together is how Dr. Tedros becomes Director General of the WHO.
Nobody became Director General, even his own, because even his own government never nominated him.
Africa speaking
Professor
together.
and Alan, let me come back to you. Let me get Professor Banyua and Honorable Mbide.
I think this is interesting, because my colleagues fail to appreciate the fact that the United Nations belongs to the P5. They decide what happens. And
you've thrown a new spanner in the works.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a war today in the Middle East and the UN has no role in it, what are we talking about? Because one of the P5s is in it. So yes, we have been accepted to be part of it so that we can be governed in it. And it's similar to the trade, to the business aspect of the United Nations, that we have signed an agreement with the European Union, with America, never to export processed coffee, and many other things. Now, when Africa tries to come together, when East Africa tries to come together, one of the P5 will come and lecture to you and say, don't be part of that. And that's it. So, if you are able to gain the economic muscle like China has done, like India has done, then you may be admitted to the P5.
Absolutely.
But before you gain that muscle, I mean, the rules are there to govern you, not to mess up, and if you mess up, they'll whip you. Otherwise, for them, they do what they wish.
Africa is a Chirachi.
Yeah.
Yes, Honorable Mbidi.
First of all, of course, I hold the very strong sentiments, almost akin to what Alan has said. I am now going to give you a practical analysis of exactly what makes the UN almost non-existent within the lenses of an African. He has given the historicity of its commencement of 1945, and of course, obviously, the problems for which it was an answer. We are now dealing with different challenges. And obviously, the manner in which it was coached, it can no longer answer to the challenges available, even by practice. The United Nations, when you look at it, what is the implementing entity of all the decisions, factors and combinations of the United Nations? How do resolutions get implemented? What is the faucet origo? What is the real origin of what actually makes it a logical necessity for the UN to even be mentioned as a factor or a combination in any of the problems that exist? Number one, we are looking at, obviously, the normative instruments that establish the rules of the game. Implementability of the provisions of the normative instruments and the players. Now, when you talk about the objects for which it was formed, if it was for peace and security, okay, we have got close to 50, between 50 to 60 conflicts in the whole world. Africa has got the majority of up to around 28 conflicts. It is not represented as a member of the P5, so it has no role. It is never a penny holder. The penny holders will make decisions on what happens in terms of drafting resolutions of the UN Security Council, in terms of implementation of, for example, solutions to be to apply to the DRC. The penny holder has got the majority of companies practicing mineral extraction in DRC. So clearly, what is going to be the nature of the resolution that will actually apply as a solution to the conflicts in the DRC? So clearly, the United States as the penny holder, having the majority of companies with interest in the DRC, will definitely make sure that you elongate the conflict to the extent that there is no substantive government that can address the idea of minerals. Number two, countries with almost no conflict at all. When you look at Europe, between 3 to 5 conflicts, they are members of the they have got a P5 member. Now, Alan has just told you, a whole continent with over 1.5 billion people does not have a say in terms of what happens.
And they think they are participating.
Yes. So what do you call the UN? Number two, the objects for which we want to control, you know, Professor, the objective reason why you want to control conflicts is because of criminality that actually accompanies a conflict. So what happens? Criminality has had its own protocols that have been established. All, of course, all having its own, for example, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. If you have to look at it and the responsibility of partner states to respect obligations, what are the players doing? The United States, for example. It quickly runs around the whole globe trying to establish bilateral relations by way of non-surrender agreements to be signed by several countries. Now, how is implementation of, for example, Chapter 7 of the Charter of the UN, reference of causes and criminalities to the International Criminal Court, how is that implementable or implementable when the United States, which is a participating country in conflicts, has signed non-surrender agreements almost with all countries, to the extent that whoever commits a mistake, commits a crime, cannot be surrendered to one of the courts established under the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, of course, looking at the Rome Statute of 2003. So I am saying, the way the United Nations looks like now, it cannot operate. It is just, and whoever believes in what it can do is to, of course, you are only telling me that you have got a very great sense of humor. It cannot.
Let's leave it at that. Let me read some feedback here that has come through. Thank you, Timothy, for the show. This is Kasare from Nakawa. Please help me explain to the Otunu formula to the nation. Also, because I had the formula the UN is using for electing the UN Secretary General is being designed by Olaro Otunu, and it is called the Otunu formula. Okay. Good evening, Timothy. It is a very good thing to be able to have someone of that caliber to be up there, even as a nomination. Uganda as a country will benefit a lot if he goes through. But if he doesn't, at least we know our politics has reconcilable measures within it. Okay. This is Isaac from Lira. I think talking about the UN, it should proceed to operate like the Red Cross Society, because as for the theoretical and the impracticability objectives that are concerned, it is that German Shepherd that cannot bark and without teeth. It's an organization that is just marvelous with ideas, but impracticable with no mechanism in implementation. Fire. Thank you for the show. In Masaka, the LC, people moved in drones, cars, and were announced as the winners before it escalated. Wandera George, thank you, Wandera. Lastly but not least, okay, thank you very much for this. Finally, before we take a break, Timothy, thank you for the show. This is very informative, and I'm liking what you're discussing there. It's very educative for us who are just interested in what is happening. But also, how is this beneficial to an ordinary Ugandan? Thank you. That's okay. Yes, you were saying?
I just wanted to say that we are, of course, we are discussing, it's very important that actually we should retreat to our regional blocks. But one thing we need to remember is that the other peoples being in the UN has not stopped, or being in the regional blocks, has not stopped them belonging to the UN agency. You have ASEAN 4 countries in Southeast Asia where China belongs, Japan belongs, you have the American groups, you have the European Union. So I think we should not posture or compare the UN vis-a-vis African Union. We have each and every right to belong to the African Union, or to even retreat to the East African community, but shouldn't stop us playing at that high level. I think the only challenge I find as a person who really believes in, for the purposes of identity, that we should try to retreat, like Alan is saying, and define ourselves, is this whole thing I don't understand, that even when we retreat into the AU, it's 60 to 70% paid for by foreigners, okay? By foreign donors. So even if we were to retreat there and let's say leave the UN to the African Union, what then will happen when even your budget there is largely financed by the same people with the same interests? So I think
there's an opportunity to amend that. 2016 in Kigali, they agreed that 0.2%.
Yeah, but from even beyond that, why should we even be funded 60 to 70% by foreigners? Okay. Because actually they are driving the interests there. I totally agree to what Nkrumah said, that as long as we don't have economic power, we shall still be controlled by imperialism. So we need to address that if we are really going to be people who can assert ourselves. Otherwise, we shall always be the usual African with a begging bowl controlled by others. Even when you retreat home to East African Union or African Union, the same guys follow you there and pay your budget, influence your agenda, and do everything. So if we are discussing the UN, we should discuss the same level of analysis should come into the regional bodies.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to say the formula that is being asked about, the Otunu formula, I with deference to the professor, it's basically a straw poll, a confidential poll that happens at the United Nations, which you might be a victim of because it's confidential and it is how you narrow down the candidates as to who becomes Secretary General. Is that correct? Yeah, sure. It's how you decide which candidates are going to become the Secretary General. And that was introduced by Dr. Olaro Otunu when he was president of the Security... by Olaro Otunu, he's not doctor. By Olaro Otunu when he was president of the Security Council.
Thank you. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be doing more on this UN subject.
MTN voice bundle. Yeah. Load. Hey. Hello, Mama. Hey, it is me, your son, Opio. Hey, now, Mama, listen to me. MTN has the offer. Yes, it has the offer. You load from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Now, they have free MTN to MTN minutes. And those minutes are there all day. So you load, you'll thank me later. Mama.
Load an MTN voice bundle between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. and get 3 free MTN to MTN minutes valid all day. Dial *100 *21 hash and get your free minutes bully daily. Free or fire with free minutes from MTN. Together, our connection is unstoppable. MTN.
The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, MEMD, warns the public that fraudsters using fake social media accounts to solicit money while falsely claiming they can secure licenses, appointments with the Honourable Minister, or influence ministry decisions. Please note, you do not pay to meet the Honourable Minister or any Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development officials. Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development has not authorised anyone to collect money on its behalf. All Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development services are free of charge, except for statutory fees provided for by the law. Verify any communication by contacting info@energy.go.ug. Report any suspected fraud to the Ministry and the relevant law enforcement.
We don't need anyone's permission to move forward. We never have. What we need is the power to do it our way. To move our people, our goods, our ideas across cities that breathe with our energy. Spiro is not your typical EV company. It's the power grid for African ambition. A network that connects Nairobi to Kigali, Lagos to Lome, Dar to Kampala. Not with cables and wires, but with plain, quiet, relentless movement. Every swap keeps the city running. Every ride links one life to another. We're copying no one else's future. It's we who powers the cities we live in. It's we who shapes the world they'll become. This is Africa, powered by us.
The Security Council, of course, needs to be reformed. The Secretary General can only emphasize that it should be reformed, but has no clout or power to do that. It's a business of member states. He is just a chief executive without powers. So the issue of reform of the Security Council has been going on forever, but it's a business of member states. It's really, we call it realpolitik. The big powers that sit on the Security Council don't want to give easily their privilege. So the Secretary General can only call on them to call on the Security Council to be reformed. Climate change, I happen to be a head of the subsidiary body. I happen to be one of the leaders of climate change in the UN. We are currently organizing the COP31 in Turkey. And the issues of climate change are very, very important. It's a crisis. It's a crisis. It needs, it actually zeroes around, and the Secretary General is very important on calling on countries to respect their commitments. Africa only contributes less than 1% on global, on greenhouse emissions, but we are the victim. The next step is for Dr. Otunu to go to New York and start offering himself to member states, appearing before town halls and presenting his vision, and also talking to the Security Council. We have to make sure that we lobby the Security Council. At the end of the day, they are the ones with mandate to recommend a candidate. And the elections will be in October. There is no time. So the work is cut out for Uganda's diplomats, including me, to make sure that we at least make an impression. And once we make an impression, the countries really will look at our candidate and we call on them to be open-minded and give him a chance. Really, I really call on the international community to support the candidature of Dr. Otunu. He's an excellent candidate. He will really serve the global community.
Welcome back from that quick break there, and also the interview there by Ambassador Adonia about the UN Secretary General there. I'm joined by Professor Sarah Sali, Honorable Mbide, Professor Puli, Professor Balunywa, and the ED of the Uganda Media Center, Alan Kasuja, and we're discussing the UN elections for the Secretary General that will be happening towards the tail end of this year. But quite a number of, let me read these three so that I can come to Professor Balunywa. Someone says, good evening, Timothy. May I get to know when there is going to be food relief distributed in Nabela-Tiuk district? Okay, interesting. Then finally, someone says, Timothy, I like the ideas that are being shared here. I'm watching from Kibuku district. The fact that Olaro Otuno forgot to vote for himself, will he remember to vote for himself? I know this is a little bit below the belt there. Let me come to Professor Balunywa. Professor, if we're to count 81 years, what would we say are the achievements and the shortcomings of the UN?
Well, I think in terms of achievements, if you look at the...
Especially among those three parameters they have as mandate.
I want to look at the organs of the United Nations, FAO, WHO, UNESCO, and all these others. There is something that has been achieved to a great extent. As long as it doesn't involve politics and money, it's been a wonderful deal. For Africa, we go back to the Dag Hammarskjöld, 1916 Congo. Why did this fellow die? Because he was not serving the interests of the P5 at that moment.
And for those who don't know, the P5 are the
five permanent members of the
Security Council.
Yes. So those, if he was not serving those interests, he had to die. Because as has been said, Congo was a personal estate of the king in Europe, and he hands it over. And the way they were treating Africans then, I mean, because you are generally poor, you have no right. So the United Nations Security Council, the political aspects of it, safeguard the interest of the permanent members of the Security Council. For the rest of the countries, as long as you don't have economic power, there's nothing you're going to say. If you have some economic power, take a case of Singapore, for instance. When Singapore was developing its economic muscle and kind of replicating what was happening in UK, in London, in terms of the financial markets, people started listening to Singapore. It became a relevant state within the broader multilateral institutions because it had the money. So if you have the money, they'll listen to you. If you don't have the money, they will not.
Just like you in your village.
Yes, just like in the village, yes. If you have the money, people listen to you. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at how has China emerged to be able to come into to the table, I mean, it has amassed economic power. Yeah. When you amass economic power, ordinarily you have technological power, and to be able to safeguard that, you need the military power. When you have those three, the money, the technology, and the military, you can sit on the table. If you don't have them, with this massive poverty in African countries, sorry, you will not be part of that table.
And you know, we were talking about the security and the peace there. Yes. What failures have they had? Because you've given us the achievements, UNICEF.
The failures are in terms of the interests of the smaller states wanting to be treated fairly. I mean, look at what is happening in somebody talked about how many conflicts are in Africa, 20-something. And if you go back to find out, they are caused by these same people who are the permanent members of the Security Council because of economic interests. So to me, those are failures. We are failing as a world to uplift the poor people because the permanent members' interests are different. And Africa, even through the African Union, will not be able to do this until we are able to have good economies that can produce and possibly, through BRICS, be able to export to the new arrangement.
Even the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is a vehicle for that.
Yeah, I mean, it won't work. It won't
yes,
work.
But how many countries are trading under the AFCFTA?
This is just 2 years old, 3 years
No,
old.
it won't work as long as the P5s have interest in it.
The structural conditions are in such a way that even the AFCFTA, you are trying to remove internal barriers. Yeah. I was reading, I think today I was reading, and Possible Mukasa knows this from ESC, we, under the Treaty of East African Community, we are supposed to have 4 pillars of integration: a customs union, a common market, an economic union, and a port confederation. But let's look at the other two, the two which are economic, which is the customs union and the common market. Conceptually, a common market, and they'll start with the customs union is where we have a common external tariff. A common market is where we have the freedom of movement, goods, people, and services, and right of residence. I can move from here and go and settle in Rwanda, like a Rwandan. We have had this in 2010. Look at the non-tariff barriers, the levies, the way bridges, you see, my problem simply is this, and the whole multilateral system. Because we are just pointing fingers at ourselves. Because at the end of the day, it is the states, it is us. If we create these institutions, we have created these structures. We have sent Mbite to go to IALA. IALA makes decisions, makes resolutions, and I will not go into the resolution which IALA does and the structures of ESC, the competition commission, the rules of origin, and we have all this stuff. But we are the same people who are not doing what we are supposed to do.
We just have to be very efficient in whatever we are producing.
The inefficiency of which is defined.
To be able.
Professor Puli, let me have Professor Balunua finish so that.
I was saying that as African countries, the failures are coming from a multiplicity of sources. One is ourselves. The fact that we've failed to put our houses in order, to become more efficient in production, because maize landed in Uganda from South America is 50% cheaper than maize produced in Uganda. Why? Because we're not efficient. We can spend all day.
But Professor, these are young countries. These countries are younger than the King of England.
No. We will not agree with you, Alan. It's about the
complexities of African state formation.
60 years of independence, and you think it is. But also, even as an older man, I don't know how old Alan you are, but really.
Alan and Professor Puli, let's have a civil debate. Please allow Professor Balunua to finish his thought.
Countries that have emerged and joined that and are listened to are economically efficient. And what our problem is, we are very inefficient as African countries in whatever we are doing.
Young African countries.
Yeah, but doesn't mean you cannot be efficient.
Nations put together to exist.
Efficiency has got a mechanism of measuring it. It's an input-output process. And our input, we are so bad at it. If we're able to produce maize efficiently, by the way, we produce sugar efficiently, but we can't export it to Kenya. Again, you're saying go back to the blocks, but even the blocks are not working.
But gentlemen, I feel like you're treating these issues like it is an event. That the emergence of a functional African bloc is. Uganda. In Uganda's case alone, Bunyoro, Kitara, and Buganda were at war for decades. But now they suddenly have to coexist in this entity called Uganda.
Okay.
And so, and I'm saying that the different... the complexities of trying to create a nation called Uganda.
How did we get the Treaty of Westphalia?
Okay.
Professor
Puli, please allow Professor Balunua to finish his thought.
Let me complete my...
Professor Puli, not
me.
I think what I'm saying is that the United Nations has succeeded in many areas. I've talked about the WHO and all these others. They are pretty good. And African countries have actually benefited from them. Even in terms of jobs, all this stuff. But where it concerns the economics of the developed countries, they have not allowed us to make a breakthrough. That's one.
Where is our agency allowed us?
Two, we have also not put in sufficient effort. I talked about Singapore. Singapore put in effort. Malaysia put in effort. Those Asian tigers have put in effort by prioritizing a number of things that drives knowledge and technology. Now, I'll give you a very quick example. the telephone companies, the mobile telephone companies, would like Ugandans to use the application on their mobile phones to access money. But the Ugandans don't have the mobile phone, the smartphones. So they use what they call USSD, you know? Why? Because they are poor. And why? I mean, there are many factors that have put us into poverty. We must address these factors, emerge out of that poverty, become more efficient as producers of whatever we're producing, and also be conscious. Why is it that the policies that we put in place, market-oriented policies, have opened up the Uganda economy? But who is producing here? Why? They're more efficient.
Thank you. Yeah. A comment by Honorable Mbide before I come back to Alan.
Capital.
Yes, you know, when we used to debate in secondary schools, but particularly whether foreign aid has done more harm than good. There was one time I asked our own colleagues, but really, what came first? Was it poverty or the debt? I think African countries need to start now thinking in terms of where we go wrong our own selves, than practically whether we are allowed by the foreign entities to do anything or the contrary. In terms of the Common Market Protocol, by the way, progress is being registered. However, obviously, as countries debate, there are matters that were reserved as annexes. And when you look at the Common Market Protocol, Article 13 and 14, land is one of them. Partner states would want to take their own independent decisions on matters to do with the land. Why? They think some countries are so small that they want to reach out to their own land. Others are still thinking in terms of, now when you are looking at the political federation, for example, as the fourth limb of integration, that includes ceding power.
Yes.
But we have leaders in Africa that don't want to cede power, in East Africa particularly. Some are the same leaders for long, others are the same parties leading the countries for long, for example, like Tanzania. Others are the same families, like in Kenya. So nobody leaves.
Sorry, Timothy,
so
but
they
fundamentally, no, Mbidi, before you leave that point of political federation,
yes.
You see, the very virtue of the fact that you go and sign the Treaty of East African Community, you know the principle of good faith.
I know.
Pacta sunt
servanda. Yes.
The principle of good faith. You are already, by the, as you are putting your signature on that treaty, you are basically also ceding sovereignty. Part of your sovereignty is going.
That is theoretical, Professor. Here in Uganda,
it's academic.
It is academic.
Actually, Prof, we have to. Everything has to be informed by theory.
When you look at our constitution,
allow him to finish.
Yes. Let me
real
run
politics
this point.
is different.
Yes, it is completely different.
No,
here in Uganda,
Alan has joined the bandwagon now. The practice thing.
Here in Uganda,
yes, Honorable Mbide.
The principle of pacta sunt servanda, respecting treaty obligations, has even been reduced into the constitution. It is part of Objective 27. And when you look at the amended constitution, Article 8, capital A, stipulates that Uganda shall be run on the principle of respect for treaty obligations. Yes. Now, one of the treaties that we have, you look at the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the protocol that establishes the court.
Yes.
That protocol requires Uganda to deposit a declaration under Article 34, Clause 6, to allow Ugandans to use the African court. It is not there. I even went to in Uganda for up to today we have.
I have seen the decision of the African Commission on Human Rights.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is why I am telling you that all of these now remain academic. The practice is practically different. However, I think there are things that we need to begin looking at. Do you know that Uganda is commencing a platform that is going to be deadly for the African region? They are going to want to because we have opened the fronts, for example. We are no longer thinking about only Dar es Salaam and Mombasa as outlets for market purposes. But if Kenya refuses, we are now opening under the DESU. You have looked at the DESU authority, which is establishing a route through Djibouti. Our participation in terms of roads to DRC.
But that even the admission of DRC in EAC is part of the program.
Sometimes we are not going to look at the failures that we have encountered as the East African community. We are just going to look at even the fact that we have arrived should actually be a win itself. The fact that countries can sit and begin. However, still, the players are the ones now that are establishing again the antagonism within the African continent. For example, what is the problem between Uganda, Rwanda on one part and Congo DRC? If, for example, factors and combinations, the United States is deleted, these countries can solve their own problem.
Thank you.
Yes.
Quick comment, I go to Alan.
Yes, so just a quick comment. I think I just wanted to back what Professor Balunya said, that we are focusing a lot on the politics. If you focus a lot on the politics and on the military and the wars, you might actually think the UN has not done much. But indeed, when you talk about rights, women's rights, children's rights, cultural rights, so many of these things, climate change, all those SDGs, there's a lot that has come in, and of course it has come with commensurate funding. But that having been said, I think it is also important for us to understand why we are where we are. I think we tend to think that people are ready to leave Africa there so that it is able to develop. Everyone is focusing on Africa like they have always done, but this time with more intensity because of what Africa has in terms of mineral wealth. But also we should also not forget the 40 years of negative growth occasioned by neoliberalism. Of course, before that, you have centuries of slavery and the rest. So when Alan also says that these are young states, it is partly true. And the mere fact that no one is going to let you to be alone. So we have to wake up to this realization and assert ourselves. If we do not assert ourselves and we think people are just going to let us be because we have very good economics, therefore we are going to develop and grow, it won't happen. Because people are looking for territory, people are looking for those to control. Aid is one of the ways they control some of these spaces and carry the leash over you. So until we come to terms with that and find our way out of it, we shall always think like that. The UN will be on one side, a thing which enables us, but also another side, a thing which looks on when we are being oppressed, either through economic policies or wars, but could also be an agent of our oppression, of our imperialist kind of oppression. But also having said that, we should also not imagine that African countries are not without interest, or the leaders of African countries are not without interest. And when we know that, then we also need to interrogate their kind of interest and why these things keep recurring on the African continent. We are here counting the UN by the number of conflicts that have arisen. Did we ever imagine that the conflicts would end? Actually, some will end, but others will grow because that's the nature of human society, and greed and the desire to control. So I think we need to have all these things in perspective when we are judging why Africa remains where it is, and why the UN is the way it is, and also why the responses to a conflict in Africa does not generate as much interest as a conflict, for example, in Ukraine, and the amount of investments put in those same conflicts, even when they are all wars. Thank you.
Alan, let me come to you. It's about coming to 4 years, or a little bit north of 4 years. Russia, Ukraine, we're looking at the US, Israel, Iran. We've just talked about economic power. How much can the UN do about interests of all these 193 countries, especially when conflict arises?
A lot of people will argue that maybe the UN's mandate is too wide and too much for it to bear. And it does all the nice things that the Professor Sally references, but then there's also this other mandate that that's a burden in so many respects on it. Because, again, with due respect to the UN, when was the last time it fixed a conflict? When was the last time it ended one? When you have what is obviously veto paralysis, a situation where if one of the countries with veto powers doesn't like a decision by the United, it will veto it. A recent vote you saw in the UN on Gaza, for example, you had 14 countries saying yes and one saying no, and halas, a decision is taken and one won because it had veto power. And this is why there are arguments for the reform, same way we are arguing for the reform of the international financial architecture that favors countries that are not African. We are basically saying, and by the way, the UN is struggling financially. 15% of its budget was cut recently. And hundreds of jobs of friends, some of who are my relatives, lost their jobs because of cuts at the United Nations. And even Guterres has said, the Secretary General Guterres has said, that there is a risk of bankruptcy. It is the need for reform that the UN needs to confront.
What is that reform you
That
keep
reform
insinuating?
it cuts across. It's major surgery. It is not incision and
which will
drainage.
not happen.
It is not I and D to pull out pass. It is going to the crux of the issue in a multifaceted manner. And it includes things like Africa's voice at the United Nations. When you have 1.5 billion people not able to have a voice in conflict situations, that might be the reason why the UN is hamstrung. When you have a situation, where can it fund itself? And I also associate myself, one of the few things I agree with Professor Poli on is the fact that the UN's member states need to rise up, and if they still need this thing to be fit for purpose, they need to rise up and make sure that it has the tools that it needs in order to function properly. And I think those are the sorts of reforms we need to be talking about. What does the UN, let's stop talking about the UN created in 1945 and recognize that back then typewriters were in vogue, and now we have artificial intelligence. You know, we now have, and the dispensation, the situation we are confronted with is completely different. And you have more countries demanding more from multilateralism, and multilateralism is obviously collapsing because it can no longer function because of the stretch and the pressure on organizations like the UN. It needs to have an introspective, probably, maybe not introspective, but we do need to look at the UN and see where those weaknesses are, and to reform it in a manner that will make it an entity of the future, or probably just allow it to capitulate.
Before I come to Professor, there are also bodies that are coming up. I think 2 years ago, BRICS coming up, Brazil, Russia, all these bodies coming up to be able to sort out their interests, looking at interests that really...
Because of the dysfunction of the UN.
So do you think these bodies can supersede the UN, especially looking at where we would like to be as a globe?
Maybe not supersede the UN, but a lot of people...
complementary. It can be
complementary. But you know, I think for as long as the UN delays its reform, the more irrelevant it will be. You know, Africans can no longer sit at the foot and hope for crumbs to fall off the table and eat those crumbs. Africans need to have a seat at the table, and if they're not allowed to sit at the table, vamos, they can go somewhere else and create their own entity. We can no longer beg to sit at the table because, again, we will continue to self-correct the East African community, the African Union. We shall continue to, you know, the decision taken in Kigali in 2016, where 0.2% of revenue from imports will go into strengthening the African Union. These are achievable. We just need to wake up to that reality and to recognize the fact that your neighbor doesn't want you to watch TV through the window. They don't want to let you into the house. And so as a result, just go and do your own thing.
We're no longer watching the TV from the window. They're telling us what's happening.
Fundamentally, Timothy, I think for me, the most important, you know, achievement for the UN, or any other organization for that matter, is the convening power, which the UN has. That you can get 193 countries sitting and debating on anything. That in itself is an achievement.
But Professor, one would also reach to that same question and say, then what next?
No, because you see, convening power also means that you're having a conversation. It's not that you are just going to convene and sit there and you watch each other. It's also about talking about things like what Prof. Sally is saying, things like SDG, MDGs, and the Pact of the Future, and UN at 80, all this. But I think important, and I go back to Alan. You see, Alan is talking about reform. What sort of reforms are we talking about? Are we reforming the entire structures of the organs of the United Nations? Are we reforming the specialized agencies? Are we reforming? What are we exactly reforming? That's the first question. The second question, when you're talking about African voice, this I have heard of this African voice. The UN, you know, it is marginalized. 90% of the time of the Security Council is spent on African things, but Africa has no voice. Africa has 3 representatives in this council, the A3. If you add on the Caribbean, which has been associating with us, we can say it is A3 plus 1.
You can't compare that to the...
No. I'm coming to that. Yes. So the argument has been on the issue of permanent representation. Because many of the African countries, if you look at the charter which was signed in San Francisco on the 26th of June 1945, basically there were 3 or 4 African countries, Ethiopia, Liberia, possibly you can talk about Egypt, and the Union of South Africa. These are the countries which signed the original charter. Which original charter? Because also we have to remember, because of the way what I have said, that this is an organization which was created by the United States. That's why the original charter is actually in the basement of the White House.
What is it learning?
Now, because that in itself should tell you who owns the United Nations.
Who has the charter?
Who has the charter? It should tell you that, because many people, people talk about things, and I would want also to pursue the question of the economic development. You reference Singapore. People have told me, Kasaija, we have read this book From Third World to First by Lee Kuan Yew. But I don't know whether people actually have internalized what Lee Kuan Yew is saying. Singapore was founded as a city-state. It does not have a village. If you in Singapore, you cannot say, I'm going to the village. What did Lee Kuan Yew say? Look, we don't have a hinterland. We are going to make the world our village. A Singaporean, when he tells you, I'm going to the village, he's going to London, he's going to New York. That's his village, because there's no hinterland. There's no village in Singapore. And what did Lee Kuan Yew do? He said, look, we need to invest in human resource. We get our people, we are going to train them in the best university in the world, but we are going to entice them to come back. We will pay them more. And that's why today Singapore has a surplus budget. It's one of the very few countries in the world which has a surplus budget. It was a deliberate effort by the leaders of Singapore, or by the leader of Singapore, who is Lee Kuan Yew. Now, we as Africans, because they normally sit, I have been a student of African integration, African international relations for a very long time. I have sat in meetings in Addis. I have sat in Nubi. And sometimes I actually feel tired. Why? Because what we say as Africans, you imagine, I just give one example. In 1963, Ethiopia hosted and they are very nice speeches. If you ask me, I can give you the record of 1963, the 33 countries that founded the OAU. Fantastic speeches. Now, fast forward, we need to build a new headquarters. We say, please, China, can you give us a grant of $200 million? If you go to Addis, the headquarters of the African Union, it's actually built by a grant from China. Now, you look at these 55 African countries, if you include Western Sahara, there are those of us, or those of people who think that Western Sahara should be a state. 55 African countries cannot raise $200 million to build a headquarters.
Philip, even the presents you get when you're there, the book, the umbrella will be coming from China.
Now, when you sit in that building and people tell you that we are sitting in Beijing, then there's another building which has just been built by the German, which is called, they are built by Berlin. Now, look, guys, we can talk until the cows come home. The point simply is this, that we are in a situation whereby the UN, as we are discussing it at 81, but first of all, it's also an achievement, by the way, for an organization to exist for 81 years. The League of Nations only existed for what, 26? From 1920 to 1946. This has been something that we can actually celebrate that it is there. You ask about success.
DP has been a political party for a long time.
Yes, DP has been there since 1954. Since 1954.
Professor, let me allow me come to Professor.
Who cares how long this thing exists?
So, gentlemen, allow me come to the lady who's here. Professor, especially with emerging contrasts, emerging interests, intrigue, different leaders that are there, is the UN fit for purpose moving forward?
I think, Philip, yes, it is. It needs reform, as Alan has said, but I think your question should not be driving at, therefore we don't need it. You still need it. You still need that global police. Even when you have these regional blocks. It creates a level of arbitration. So what we just need is to empower the people who are there so that everyone has a voice, or everyone feels they belong.
Empower with what?
I mean, with voice, with space, with positionality. For example, why are we talking about the P5? Okay? So if the moment people realize that this thing belongs to its owners, and we are simply escorting the process, then you'll see its power not as binding or not being taken seriously. But for starters, we need a body at that level to be able to rein in some of the things. We are counting its relevance according to the number of wars. But we have not stopped to imagine what would have happened without it, okay? Given that even when we have regional blocks, whether we're talking about NATO, AU, I don't know what else, still people are going to war, okay? But at least after they have done all that, then there will be some debates and some gymnastics at the UN. They may not be the best, but at least people know that there's a level there, okay? The International Criminal Court and all those different bodies of the UN that are in different places. It's important they're there. But having said so, we still need to, it still needs to be reformed to reflect the current context in the world today. Africa is not that small place which was just peasantry with a few hundreds of thousands of people as it was in 1945. And it's not that, of course, at the time we arrived, soon after independence, we were really very far. But now many of these countries have developed. Africa is being seen as the continent of the future. It's going to have the fastest population growth, but also economic growth. So as we arrive into that space, we can no longer, or we should not be allowed to occupy the spaces the way we occupied. So it's important, but has to be reformed to reflect the new kind of geopolitics, the new realities, and the new contradictions in the world. So those people that derive the power from exploiting others should know that their days controlling some of these bodies is unnumbered. Short of that, actually, they will be left, they might be left alone in their country. If you look at what's happening with the West African countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, so they may be overrun, but a statement is being made that, guys, we can't continue without you. Okay?
But also someone could say what's happening in DRC, where President Kagame and President Tshisekedi met Trump and signed an agreement, and we still see flights walking out of the forests there. Yeah, those can still be there, but I think for me what matters is what were the interests of the people who signed, as opposed to the past when they were just being patronized, okay? It could be that there are issues of trade and whatever taking place. So dealing with foreigners is not in itself a bad thing. But the issue is, what are your interests in what we are doing? I think the problem we've had as Africans for a long time is to imagine other people have our interests in their hearts. And therefore, whatever they do is of interest to us. So we relegated, we left all of that to them. And even when we bicker, it's in a small way, we all run to them thinking they have our best interests at heart. They are not, actually. They are very interested in our falling apart. So, but if you understand what your interests are and say, guys, we are going to do trade, but on these terms, you can actually sign those agreements, okay? Because trade is a norm. Globally, people do trade. The problem is us relegating our interests for others to define, for others to patronize, and for us, we just follow. Because, I mean, these guys have written books for a long time where Africans are seen as an infertile race, a group of people who actually are not really mature. They're just big children, or children in big people's skin. We need to outgrow that, to know that we can set our standards, we can set our growth, we can set, but we have to be ready to pay the price for it. If we are going to go that way, for example, like at the AU level, we should stop looking at others building for us or paying our allowances or paying whatever. There's a price you pay for independence, for sovereignty, for identity, and for asserting yourself. You cannot say that and try to assert yourself when actually you're going to go to the same people you're starting to pay your budgets. If the EU and the US don't pay meetings for our meetings, then we cannot hold meetings as an African Union. That in a way is an embarrassment. So it's still important, it's still fit for purpose, as long as we're going to occupy this globe with the interests and the unpredictability of the consequences of those interests we wield. We shall always need some global regulator, okay? Some interstate process that regulates that. And it's really about that uncertainty. Until recently, we didn't know that Ukraine would break out, okay? You don't know where it's going to break out. I know they've stereotyped Africa with war, but you see, you don't know where the next theater of war is going to be. So that is important. But it has to be reformed to reflect the new realities of the people that constitute the membership of the UN. Thank you. Honorable Mbide, some things that Alan said, some that Professor said, especially when they mentioned the headquarters in Addis Ababa, how they were built. These economic powers. Alan also mentioned, you know, one vetoed the 14 and the resolution was passed. Is the UN still fit for purpose, especially in this new economic warfare that looks like interests in Africa?
In the current state of affairs, it is not. Certainly, the fact that it has lasted for 81 years is a question of durability. It might not definitely amount to having worked for all the 81 years.
DP.
You need to protect me from
Professor Pui.
But I would agree that, of course, there are necessary reforms that have to be undertaken. And the reforms need to take the shape of, one, membership. Membership to, of course, the UN Security Council needs to be addressed. We need to have representation from Latin America, representation from Africa, and definitely that needs to happen. Then number two, decision making, because the structure, functioning of the whole UN system needs to be amended. From declarations to implementation generally. Because clearly now it has formed a multiplicity of documents that you can read and go home. But in terms of what has been implemented generally, it is almost a complete nothingness. So we need to generally shift. It also needs to look at Africa not as a uniform whole, because it is not really yet a uniform whole. We still have exigencies of cooperation within the African body politic. But we can look at regional economic communities, for example. They can be contributing entities to representation. When you look at the East African community, you have been talking about the fact that, for example, Rwanda was summoned with the DRC to the United States. But there are systems that had been undertaken in the East African community. The system that was undertaken by the summit of the East African community, that was almost also leading to addressing the problem within the DRC. Then, including the system that was undertaken as a joint system between the East African community and SADC. They were all contributing entities. They had resolutions that, notwithstanding, the United States now created its own system. So I can tell you that also the protagonists of problems are the big powers. Mm-hmm. Whether, of course, they are constructing material buildings for us, for purposes of it, it is a question of cause and effect. We had the personalities here that were almost, for example, Gaddafi. I don't know what happened to him and why, but at least I know that he had a contributing mind towards the construction of almost all these, including the African Union. Of course, that centers that would hold the entities of the African Union. We know how he ended. And of course, if you are now creating a list of innocent people, you cannot include the US in terms of his death. So we are looking at, obviously, what impoverished the African continent. Despite the historicity of obviously taking all our human resources for free, simply because those had the powers, we are also looking at the management factors and combinations introduced within international trade that also continuously cripple the earnings of the African continent. Professor has just told us in terms of how whether we can be in a position to export our coffee. When you see that the biggest exporters, the biggest traders within the value-added coffee, for example, are not growers of the same. When you look at Finland and you see it is one of the biggest consumers, where Finland coffee actually comes from, of course, Uganda is not mentioned. So, of course, all of those are arranged. We will fight. However, there is a role that African countries also equally need to play. Mm-hmm. The East African community is a very good organ. It is a sub-regional economic community. But in terms of negotiation for trade purposes, they again don't go as one. So clearly, it is also a problem. Now, when you look at the intra-trade within the East African community economic region itself, 14%. It is also tainted with a lot of blackmail, and they say your maize has aflatoxins. Then,
milk has hair.
Then we don't have a substantive product list. Then we continue now to insist that, of course, each country must now produce a list of products itself. There is still a problem. So fundamentally, we equally have a problem, but the major problems are also bestowed and subtended on us by, again, the powers. There is the fact that they participate in trying to grow our own regional economic communities are sometimes in relation to their interests. Exactly. But at the same of the...
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. Yes. So what the Africans and the East Africans per se need to do is to, first of all, do a calculation. The factors and combinations. Our interests put forward on the same table, weighed against the interests of the supporting entities, we can still survive and succeed, even when we are being actually quarantined by those with bigger interests and bigger powers. So the question, the UN has to definitely be overhauled. It has got to be overhauled in terms of membership, in terms of the veto power system has to also be deleted itself, because it is completely establishing the UN with all amounts of prevarication. It is postureless for you to say that a decision can be taken on matters to do with conflicts within conflicts of the world, for example, major conflicts, and you expect members of the P5 to agree. 2 of the 3, 2 of the 5 are actually active participants and protagonists. Yeah. So there is no way they can agree to a solution that definitely is not something that is in their favor. So that is what we call postureless, chichi, and ladida, for you to expect that they can take a decision with unanimity. It is never going to happen, and clearly that is what has stalled all decision-making procedures and processes under the UN Security Council.
Lastly, I think I'll give an opportunity to both Professor and Alan so that we can have parting shots. Professor Puli, you seem to be pro this UN body to keep there after 81 years. Now let's get to what reforms you see need to be done.
Look, yes, the UN should be there. Because if it wasn't there, then we'll have the reasons to create one which looks like it, or whatever, in whichever iteration you want to put it. Because it does much more than meets the eye. But in the context of the decision-making reforms, unfortunately, if you look at the African common position on the reform of the United Nations, or the reform of the multilateral system, of course, which is conflated with the UN, what we call the Israeli consensus of 2005. What the Africa, and I'll just only pick one aspect of this. This is the reform of the Security Council, where Africa is proposing, 1, that we should have not less than 2 permanent seats, with a veto if it still exists, but ideally with no veto, because we are saying that there shouldn't be any veto. Secondly, there is the issue of who elects the African members, because, and again, this is something that we are very, very, very concerned with initially. Who is going among the African countries? Who is going to be in the council? Now, Africa, for purposes of the African Union, by the way, Africa is divided into 3 tiers. It's a 3-tier system in the continent. You have the big 6. These are countries which contribute about 45% of the African Union budget. We have the next 10, and then we have all the others. So the issue then was automatically these big 6, the big 6, and I don't know where you can go and do your research and you see who is in the big 6. So there was a stampede. If Africa is going to get not less than 2, then automatically it will be this country, it will be that country, it will be other country. But then the Israeli consensus says that it will be the African Union to nominate, to pick the African representatives. Now, can we have this reform? If we join when the veto is still in place, will it make any difference? You see, this is also, it's not about numbers, it's also about the decision making. Can you really make a decision as an African country? I think fundamentally these are the things that we need to debate as a continent. We have to have a conversation on, so that the reform that we are talking about, whether it is in the Council, whether it is the General Assembly. For example, Honorable Mbide refers to the veto, specifically because of the issues of Russia and Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine. There is something which has happened in the United Nations, because traditionally the veto was used. Of course, again, you can go to the charter and look at Article 27.2. That's where the veto is institutionalized, where on every substantive matter you should not have a negative vote from one of the permanent 5, which is like a concert of Europe. If those of us who studied history, if you remember how the concert of Europe behaved, this is exactly how the Security Council behaves. Now, the idea was that, so if you cast a veto under the new system which has been introduced in the UN, you are supposed to explain in the General Assembly why you have used the veto. It may not go fundamentally to reform the veto, but at least there is now accountability. And these are the small things, which because I can tell you, and as I end, I can tell you to get reforms.
That is such a moral point.
Yes, but to get what we want, that fundamentally you're going to reform this thing, that you go to the heart of the reform and you say you overhaul it. In the words of Alan, we overhaul. That overhauling, I can tell you, it may not happen in Alan's lifetime. It may not happen in my lifetime. But since I still have the microphone, Timothy, let me appeal. Last week, someone broke into my car and stole my laptop. I want to appeal to the person who took my bag. Please, take the laptop, but please return to me my book, which is Chinua Achebe's book, which I was reading, and my memory sticks, and my reading glasses. You can drop them at Makerere, just come and drop them at the gate, and you say, look, lost and found. And I will be a happy person. So please, yes, and this was in Entebbe. You can take it to Entebbe police station. You can bring it to Makerere University, and my names are there. They are my cards, and please, I'm just appealing to you.
Where was it stolen?
This is in Entebbe, and I would not want to mention the names of otherwise then I spoil someone's business. But please, I'm just appealing to you. I'm using this platform.
Thank you, Professor, and I hope someone has had
Thank you, Timothy.
Finally, who would lead these reforms?
There will be no reforms.
It's the same question I'm going to put before Alan.
The institution will reform itself as the countries emerge, becoming more economically powerful. We've seen the example of China. China did not require a reform to be made in the United Nations, be accepted as a permanent member. So as countries become stronger economically, because like I told you, when you make the money, you can only make the money if you have the technology. And once you make the money of technology, you build the military power to safeguard it.
Okay.
Then you have power around the world. So as that happens, if our small countries can compete, then we will be able to sit in BRICS and say, now US, this is what we want to do, and it will reform itself. But remember, the UN is a global institution. These others are regional. And look at what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. What has the UN done about it? Nothing.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Finally, Alan, he was pro, you were against. Who would lead these reforms, and what would these reforms look like?
I don't care.
Especially for Africa.
I don't care. I don't care, and it doesn't matter to me, to be honest with you. Because I think we need to come back home. That is really my default position. We need to come back home because we have tried, and they are treating us like they have othered us. We are others.
Them and others.
Them, us, there is them, there.
And then the rest
exactly.
of us.
we are like, we are squatters.
No, but now we have a new terminology, Alan.
We are squatters in this entity that pretends to serve our interests.
We have new terminology now, Alan. Global North, Global South, Global Rest.
Professor, please, please allow him finish.
My argument is this. We have an opportunity to unite East Africa, to unite Africa, to correct our ills, to address our contradictions, to make sure that all these barriers, non-tariff barriers, all the issues that exist, the hurdles that get in the way of a much more unified and integrated Africa are addressed. Let's focus on what is important. It is like you've left your home to go and find solace somewhere else. And for as long as you do that, you'll not be prioritized. We have no voice in this space, and for as long as that is the case, we are not going to be treated as, we are going to be worse than stepchildren, because at least some stepchildren are treated well. So in my humble view, and I also need to add that this does not reflect the position of the government.
Very good disclaimer.
In my humble view, we need to come back home and to recognize that our opportunities exist in Africa and amongst people who treat us with some respect. And of course, South Africa will self-correct because there is also an issue there.
Thank you.
But Timothy, just a minute. I think I think people should not come across, or the panel here, to think that we are painting a very gloomy picture, you know. There are very good positive things that are coming from the continent. And I just wanted to point out too, Alan might be the music, and these record companies, Western record companies, big ones, in fact, many of them are setting up shop in Africa.
But you have to be careful. Where is Africa's agency?
Okay. No, I agree. This is the point. See, African agencies.
And Alan,
African
we're going
agencies.
to give you your own show after midnight.
We will continue being
but let us
in a
do a
plantation.
shot.
Yes.
The plantation has shifted and taken a new shape.
No, but African agencies is not going to be given to you. You have to exercise it.
Professor and Alan, let's leave.
I'm a pianist from South Africa, and at least you know that.
So I have a message here from Captain Francis Babu. He says, good evening. Thank you for the excellent panel. His Excellency, the President knows how to escalate issues. Therefore, this is another plus for the country cementing unity. Ambassador Olaro Otunu is a gem, the permanent representative on the UN. I will support him. Provisional polls are leaning towards Ambassador Olaro Otunu. He's also another Kofi Annan. The debate on the EU and Francophone and Anglophone, which is divisional, will not apply. Professor Kasaija is in the classroom and is teaching law. He's forgetting the practical bits of it. We're listening, but we need to get to the practical bits of it. But we cannot get to a seat on the Security Council. Let us all get the Secretary General first, then we start worrying about the seat. He continues and says, the Honorable Mbide, tell them that the ambassador is going to become the Secretary General in December. We must convene the 5 in the Security Council. Okay, thank you very much. Talks about other things there. Thank you for the show. I'm Bosco from Mbuya. May the Almighty give him all the success that he needs. And thank you for the show. Thank you, Bosco, for watching. Charles Tueheyo, Makerere University Department of Political Science. On reforms of the UN, if the reforms were to take place, who would lead them? And how do African interests feature in these reforms? Imagine UN collapses. What role will Africa play in formation of another international body? To what extent is African states' original blocks developed efficiently without involving global systems in the UN? Okay. Finally, this is Justus Mohanji from Guinea. He says, when you look at the UN, I refer you to the book, Bottom Billion's book, Four Traps, Creating the Systems by Keeping Countries Poor. The condition in the UN political scene is to manage the inferior countries and give power to the superior. Does it address changing societies like AI, technology, evolution, the design of a global political system to manage perennial countries there? Okay. Parting shots, I'll start with Professor, Honorable Mbide, Professor Puli, Professor Balunywa, and finally Alan.
Yes, so thanks, Alan, and thanks, fellow panelists. It has been a good show. Just 2 things. One is there's a book we used to read in the past, Democracy as a Discussion. It's not just simply about winning. I know now we think that when you win, then they are losers. But what Sandra Myers was talking about, democracy being a discussion, is really civic engagement and everyone finding a place in that. And I think within the democratic dispensation, I think that's what we see illustrated by our head of state nominating Olaro Otunu in that. So they could have been on different spectrums of the politics, but he has created a scenario where those kinds of interests are nurtured and they flourish, other than one being vanquished against the other. But the most important thing also that I need to remember is, you know, when China started moving into the African continent, we used to hear statements like, oh, China is better because China does trade, the West gives aid. And then I remembered what we used to be taught in class with Philip, whereby I think when we were studying political economy, we were always being reminded that Africa will not develop by choosing different masters or a better master. Africa will have to aspire for self-determination. If you're a slave, you don't break free by saying this master is better, at least let me serve this other one. You don't choose masters. The aim of the slave should be to be free from servitude. So right now, as people on this continent, our issue should not be, oh yeah, the West brought aid, then the Chinese are better, then tomorrow we shall have the Indians and the rest. The key thing is, what does Africa want? Sure. What are our interests? When we assert these interests, then we should be able to pay the price to fight for them. Otherwise, we shall continue rolling these things, AU, Africa, continental free trade area and all these things. There are so many wonderful things we have put in place, but they are not flourishing because I think we pursue a lot of short-term gain. If those are giving us conditionality with aid, and the Chinese are ready to give us money for free, so we all go sing in China, then tomorrow we shall sing another master. But as Alan says, we need to come back home, be ourselves, assert ourselves, count the price of what that means, and then move. Until we count the price or the cost of our freedom and are ready to pay for it, we shall continue having these panels and discussions and all the other kinds of things.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mbide.
Yes, I'll equally do my parting shots by making reference to one of the books I enjoyed reading when I was still in secondary school, Darkness at Noon, by Arthur Koestler, where he said that a people's level to govern themselves democratically is proportionate to the degree of their understanding of the structure and the functioning of the whole social body. Africa needs to understand. African governments need now to put a lot of money in corporate governance. It is still structurally and economically appalling that even with the operation and implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we still do not have a single African company on the list of the first 100 global companies. Yet we have got companies that have capacity, if they implemented mergers and acquisitions, to definitely enlist Africa as one of the biggest global companies, at least on the first world 100. So Africans need to dissuade themselves from being a multiplicity of smaller kings to at least a bigger king, whether one or two. That is where now African governments need to, in addition to obviously now making sure they invest in homestead incomes, as actually Uganda is excelling in establishing the volume of transactions as a calculation of a multiplicity at macro level. I think Professor Balunya knows this one even better. Africa, once we adopt mergers and acquisitions, once we invest in corporate governance of companies, I think that is the best way we can uplift our own economic scale to the extent that we can be competitive.
Thank you.
At world scale.
Professor Puli?
I think for me the conversation that we have had is quite interesting in the sense that we talk about these things when we have a candidate for the position of Secretary General of the United Nations. And that in itself, I can only wish Dr. Olara Otun well in whatever happens between now and November or December. The other thing which I think we need also to talk about is which I was alluding to, that there are things which are happening on the continent. I have read books, Conrad's Black, Into the Heart of Darkness, and all these things which are where Africa is treated as an object of study. Africa contributes nothing to international relations. Those kinds of notions, I really feel sick when I listen to that kind of stuff. There are good things that are happening on the continent, and I think whether it is AFCFTA, whether it is regional integration in the regional blocks, the only challenge simply is that we need to make these things work. Let's put our money where our mouths are. If we have talked about the pillars of integration in East Africa, let's make them work. How can you find, or how is it possible that in 2026 you have countries who are partner states in the community who are still imposing non-tariff barriers on goods which are coming from the partner states? When we have sent the customs union, when we have sent the common market, when we are negotiating an economic union, when we are talking about establishing a single currency by 2031. So really, for me, the challenge simply is that we talk too much, but we do too little. This is my problem, and as an African...
Thank you, Professor.
As an African... Professor, you know that there is a remedy to that. Of course,
these are parting shots.
You see, Mbide is...
Let me go to Professor Balunya.
Mbide is used to talking too much. See, this is the problem.
Thank you, Timothy. Timothy, the United Nations is a great institution, definitely, no doubt about it. It is run based on people's interests. There's interests are those powerful countries that have been able to generate interests which they safeguard. And what is happening globally is that as long as countries emerge from and become strong economically, they will join that table where decisions are taken. If you cannot make it economically as a country, you will never join. So the reforms cannot take place because you are diluting the interests of others. For what purpose? So the UN, great institution, reforms, not will happen. And I really think that, yes, if we have Ambassador Olaro Otuno as General Secretary, that's good for Uganda. I wish him the very best. And possibly, when he is there, we could move in something small, but nothing major.
Lastly, Alan.
You know, I remember the time when Olaro Otuno said that President Museveni and his government were committing genocide in northern Uganda. He talked about the fact that Acholis and people in the north were being put in concentration camps. These are very vicious accusations, especially against a man who is a revolutionary and a man who has committed his life to Ugandans. But the same man has decided that Olaro Otuno will be Uganda's candidate as UN Secretary General. And this, for me, as a Ugandan, is a very powerful message. I recognize that as a country, we can very often be frustrated by the contradictions that exist. But what is true is that this moment offers us two things. Number one, it demonstrates that time does its thing. But number two, there is also a reason to be hopeful. That whatever issues, whatever challenges, whatever contradictions we have as a country, we can self-correct. And President Museveni has offered us an incredible example. And I'm not speaking because he's my appointing authority, really. I'm speaking because...
It could also be that.
It is because it's a very stubborn fact. It is a fact you can't run away from. We as a country can be very frustrated very often because of the disagreements we have internally. But I am convinced that Uganda will be fine. These contradictions, these differences can be resolved, and when they are resolved, great things emerge, like this moment, where we might have Uganda as the UN Secretary General.
Yes. It is very likely. Sure. We can receive breaking news. like Captain Babu has said.
So
let's wait.
I'm very optimistic. Today, for me, this nomination of Olaro Otuno has given me reason to be optimistic.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman and lady for coming through to discuss this patent issue. Thank you so much. I also want to appreciate the production team for making today possible, for endeavoring that we are on. I want to apologize for the bits of sound that were not there. But I also want to thank you for watching the show till this hour. We appreciate that. We'll end with this quote. The UN wasn't created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Good morning.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
The government's core mandate is to maintain law and order, safeguard citizens' rights, and provide essential public services.
Remember, one of the pillars of a roadmap is innovation and entrepreneurship.
There has been this question of how are you protecting our indigenous seed?
It's going to be a tall project. That answers somebody's question.
For the past 20 weeks, the Front Bench has brought you insightful discussions on governance, security, healthcare, justice, and commerce.
Why do you